Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the work of philosopher Étienne Balibar to unpack a word we hear all the time, universal. But as we're about to see, its meaning is way more complicated than you might think. So let's start with a puzzle. You hear it everywhere, right? Universal human rights, universal values, a universal truth. But what if this word, this really powerful idea, is actually pulling us in completely different directions? Is it really a promise of unity, or is it sometimes a tool of control? Well, philosopher Étienne Balibar tackles this problem head-on, and instead of trying to find one single perfect definition, he says, forget it. He argues that the word is fundamentally deeply ambiguous. He's got this great phrase for it, an insurmountable equivocity, which basically just means its meaning is scattered and you can't really pin it down. And for him, that's what makes it so important. So, to help us make sense of this jumble, he suggests we look at universality not as one single thing, but from three totally different points of view. Think of them like three different lenses you can use to look at our complex world. We're going to walk through each one. Okay, let's dive right in. First up, we've got the most concrete, most tangible one: universality as a global reality. What Balibar means by this is the simple, undeniable fact that we are all living in one single, interconnected world system. Everything depends on everything else, from global politics and trade to the memes we share online. The easy word for this, of course, is globalization. But Balibar's point is that this isn't just some trend. He argues we've crossed a threshold, a point of no return. There is no going back to a time when nations or cultures were truly separate. This deep interconnectedness, that's just the basic reality of our lives now. But here's the twist. This is the central paradox that Balibar points out. You'd think that a truly unified world would lead to peace and understanding, right? He argues it actually does the exact opposite. It creates what he calls generalized conflicts and a global system of internal exclusion. So the very same forces connecting us are also creating brand new, intense forms of inequality. Not between separate worlds, but within our one single world. All right, so that brings us to the second viewpoint, which builds on this idea: universality as a constructed fiction. Now, wait a second. When Balibar says fiction, he does not mean fake or a lie, not at all. Think of it more like something that's been deliberately built or constructed, like a novel or a country's legal code. This is the kind of universality created by massive institutions like the modern state or a global religion, which create a shared idea of what it even means to be a person in the first place. So here's the crucial part: how it actually works. It's kind of paradoxical. These huge institutions create the individual by freeing us from something else. They pull us out of what he calls our Gemeinschafts. That's a German term for our immediate, tight-knit community, like our family or our clan, where your identity is totally fused with the groups. And the upside of this is pretty huge. We get a new kind of freedom. We become a subject, an individual who can play all these different roles in society. You can be a citizen, a professional, a fan of a sports team. We get to build an identity that's more than just who our parents were. But you knew there was going to be a catch, right? This liberation isn't exactly free. The price we pay is what Balibar calls normalization. See, to be recognized by the institution as a free individual, you have to conform to its standards of what a normal person is, and what they think, and how they act. So you're freed from one tiny community, sure, but only to be shaped and molded by a much, much larger one. And it's that very tension, that push and pull between freedom and normalization, that brings us to the final and I think most radical viewpoint: universality as a symbol. Okay, so this form of universality isn't about the world as it is or the identities we're given. It's about the world as it ought to be. This is universality used as a weapon, as a rallying cry. It's an absolute, non-negotiable demand raised against the limits and exclusions of any system. In other words, this is the language of insurrection. And at the very heart of this symbolic ideal is a concept Balibar coins himself. He calls it equaliberty, or equaliberty. It's this powerful, radical idea that equality and liberty are the exact same thing. They're inseparable. You can't have one without the other. Any so-called liberty that allows for inequality is a fraud. And any equality that crushes liberty is just another form of oppression. It is an all-or-nothing deal. And we see this ideal just explode throughout history. It's right there in the slogans of workers' movements demanding emancipation. It's in the feminist struggle for true parity, which doesn't just ask to be included in the old system, but wants to completely transform politics itself. It is the cry of anyone who has been excluded, demanding that these so-called universal rights of a society finally be applied to everyone. So, we've got these three different ideas: reality, fiction, and symbol. How do they all fit together? Well, the most important thing to get is that they aren't separate boxes. They are constantly interacting and, more often than not, clashing, all at the same time in our one shared world. This little table really helps pull it all together. You've got the reality of global interdependence, driven by globalization. Then you have the institutional fictions, like national citizenship, which create our identities through normalization. And always pushing back against the limits of those two is the symbol, the ideal of equaliberty that fuels movements for emancipation, like the fight for human rights. So why does any of this matter? What's a big takeaway? Well, it gives us this incredibly powerful tool for understanding our world. So many of today's biggest political fights are really a clash between these different versions of the universal. I mean, think about debates over migration, or citizenship, or international law. You can literally see the friction between the reality of a globalized planet, the fictions of national identity, and the symbolic demand for universal human rights playing out in real time. And that leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. What Balibar's work suggests is that moving forward isn't about picking one true universal and ditching the others. Instead, the real work, the real struggle for a better world, happens right there in the messy, unresolved tension between all three: the global reality we're stuck with, the institutional identities we're given, and that absolute ideal of freedom that we can always demand. That ambiguity he talked about, it isn't a flaw in the system. It's the engine of history itself.